As environmentalists push for the greening of America, they seldom mention that communities of color have been America's dumping ground for generations, with devastating consequences for the people who live there. On this episode of Race Talk Revolution, we discuss environmental justice with members of the grassroots organizing organization NewRoAR Against Racism. This episode originally aired November 17th, 2021.
And this is Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. Race Talk Revolution is a platform where your voice matters. We want to thank you for joining us today. Our topic today is pretty interesting, one that I've never really heard about. It is environmental racism, which is the disproportionate exposure of toxic waste and other pollutants in low-income communities, in communities of color, and other negative impacts of urban planning that disproportionately burdens those communities. So our speakers today talking about this are members of the anti-racist organization NewRoAR Against Racism, also known as NewRoAR. As always, during our conversation today, we ask that you please remain muted. And when we get to the Q&A section of the program, we will instruct you on how to raise your hand. And usually, as we always do every week, we remind you that Race Talk Revolution is a loving, inclusive platform designed to strip away the false beliefs that keep us separated as a species, uncover the not so hidden truth that we all want the same things in life, and to heal the wounds created by systemic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of systemic racism while together growing our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution community is committed to practicing radically inclusive love. Now, what this means is that we may not always understand or agree with what's being said or shared. However, we are committed to listening with respect, appreciation, and empathy. You see, it is our commitment that every person be encouraged, every person be heard and appreciated, simply because here on the Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. And here's my co-host, Reverend Lane Cobb.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning on the West Coast. So happy to be here and have the privilege of introducing our guests this afternoon. The first is Lisa Burton. Lisa Burton is a citizen activist, a proud 50-plus year resident of NewRoAR. Lisa is a member of NewRoAR Against NewRoAR Against Racism, a multicultural, multiracial, and multi-generational group that meets weekly to discuss and organize around issues of race in New Rochelle, New York. She became an accidental environmentalist after the New Rochelle City Council voted this past June to allow drive-thru businesses adjacent to multifamily housing with a specific carve-out for single and two-family housing. Also here with us today is Ms. Jocelyn Ffriend. She is a minister of pleasure who celebrates the sensual in all things. As a rebel mama and community catalyst, she continues to pursue her pleasure of liberating self, source, and others through parenting, poetry, financial planning, tantra, and community organizing. She is a financial services professional and certified authentic tantra practitioner. Ms. Leslie Gaskin is a community organizer and lifelong resident of New Rochelle, with family in residence in the city of New Rochelle for over 100 years. She is a member of several community organizations, all with a concentration on advocacy for African Americans. Welcome to all of you. We're so happy that you're here today. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm embarrassed to say that I also had not heard the term environmental racism until recently. Once I heard it, I knew exactly what it was referring to, but the term to me was new. And for those of us who don't know, would someone please explain what is environmental racism and why is it significant?
Okay, so the Thank you, first of all, for inviting us on your program. As Eugene spoke, environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. And basically, it refers to institutional rules, regulations, policies, lack thereof policies, corporate decisions that deliberately target certain communities for, undesirable land use, such as toxic garbage dumps and drive-thrus. It skirts the laws as it relates to zoning and environmental laws, and usually puts out a specific carve out to allow these communities to basically be a dumping ground for pollutants in an urban area, or toxic waste in more rural. So anyone who knows the history of the interstate highway will realize how, that is a product of environmental racism. If you want to know where thriving communities of color were, you just need to get on the highway and you will drive through what were wonderful communities, and you will see people living adjacent to highways where no trees will grow, where their kids have asthma. There's kind of a direct relationship to that. And it's all part of redlining. There's make no mistake that if you overlay a red line, the 1930s red line maps and a current day map of asthma cluster, it's horrifying in how what the direct relationship is. So I hope that answers your question about it.
Yeah, that's a good start to the conversation. Okay. Eugene has a question.
Yeah, so it's important for us to understand that environmental racism isn't new. It was new to me when we were speaking about it last week, but it isn't new, right? So just like every other form of racism in this country, it has a historical context. So what are some of the examples of environmental racism? Highways, train tracks, factories, public housing, and stuff like that. So what are some of the examples of environmental racism that we are currently seeing these days?
In New Rochelle, when we, like I said, accidental racism, accidental environmentalist actually is, we started looking at our historical Black neighborhoods and how it seemed time and time again, exceptions and special permits were being allowed that had a negative impact on the lives of the people living in those communities. So we did a deep dive, and historically in New Rochelle was, founded in the 1600s by Huguenots who were fleeing persecution and decided to enslave people to do the work to gain their liberation. And those, stolen people built a community despite the obstacles. And in the 1700s, fast forward, there's a thriving Black home ownership community in what was called Pugsley Hollow. And Pugsley Hollow, that particular section of town, when the railroad started being built, that's where they put the rail yards and all the pollutions and everything that goes along with that. When the city downtown decides that they want to have gas lighting up the downtown, is a modern city in the 1800s, where do they put the gas lines? Across the street from a Black church adjacent to the Black neighborhood. Time and time again, when decisions have to be made about where hazardous aspects of the community be for progress sake, it is always the Black community that received it. So we're not saying that the only environmental hazards that were permitted or done in the city are in the Black community. It's disproportional. It's disproportional. So I encourage all of your viewers to take a new look at their communities. I am embarrassed to say that I have always thought when you drive through someplace and think, gosh, who would want to live that close to a garbage dump? Who would want to live that close to the rail yard? Who would want to live that close to the highway? I always thought that was the penalty for poverty, that you can't afford anywhere else. But what we find is that when you're there and they build it around you and there is no way out, that's something entirely different, and that's environmental racism.
Jocelyn or Lisa, would you like to add anything? Leslie, not Lisa. Would you like to add anything?
Lisa, do you want me to pull up the map of Pugsley Hollow so that folks can see what you're talking about?
That would be great. Thank you, Jocelyn. Like I said, when we were, doing a deep dive, I guess we need to push, roll back a little bit. Jocelyn, do you want to explain, kind of our role as organizers in New Rochelle, as part of NewRoAR, how we approach things and how we look at things? Because I think that explains why we did a historical review of our community.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining again what environmental racism is, because as we know, there are so many forms of or manifestations of racism, right, that they layer on top of each other, right, to produce these violent and harmful outcomes for Black people in particular and all people of color who are within this structure. So our community group, Rochelle Against Racism, what we do and try to advance is principles that we have been blessed with from working with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond that help us to stay focused and impactful and organized around trying to undo racism, because we really believe that racism is something that has been done and it can be undone, just like race as a construct is specious, right? It's not, it appears real, but it's not, right? It's more so our institutions that repeatedly make it real. And so when we come together as a group, as Lisa's bio explained, once a week, but really more often when we're very active in our community, what we try to do is collectively develop our comprehension, our shared understanding of what race and racism is. We try to learn from history so that as we are fighting what appears to be racist policies being advanced in our community now, we can understand their historical context. So whereas we are currently fighting against this drive-thru for Starbucks being allowed in a part of a specific location that is right next to a public housing facility and also to a facility for women and children who are housing challenged, that we recognize that this is not like an isolated event. By learning from history, we see, well, actually, this is in a neighborhood that has been under attack for a long time, which is Pugsley Hollow. Well, what we understand to be one of or the first real stronghold for Black home ownership and community in the city of New Rochelle. And so as we learn from history, we try to shape what our actions will look like through really through like learning from what has been done in the past, but also through embracing culture shares, right? Because racism divides us, but culture really can bring us together. And so by understanding different cultures, we can start to embrace different ways of knowing. And so this trolley tour that we hope to talk to you about that Lisa and others in NewRoAR organized was a way of bringing those things together, incorporating different ways of knowing that would allow us to learn from history, to identify environmental racism, zoning decisions in particular, redevelopment and development decisions in particular, as actions that advance racist outcomes, right? And so in doing all of that, I mean, we're really trying to develop leadership. So the three of us who are here today, we've been blessed to be part of the leadership of NewRoAR, but we're really like pretty much non-hierarchical in that we're trying to develop leadership with all of our membership through some of those values, like, you know, learning how to identify manifestations of racism, learning how to understand how we have all experienced internalized racial oppression, and doing all of that so that we can be here trying to build out nets that work, if that makes sense. Lisa, should I keep going? Or should we talk a little bit more about our most recent action, and how we're hoping it can inspire the folks who are on the call with us?
Is it a good time to talk about the trolley tour, Lisa?
Yes, I think so. You know, I like I said, we every year, New Rochelle has an arts festival, and we have a trolley that goes around different parts of town to highlight different artists and their studios and different aspects of the city. And it is a fun and glorious time in the city. It's a great event. And so we wanted to take that same energy and that same joy of community and seeing our city in a different way and make that the basis of our trolley tour. So on the face of it, it's like environmental racists and Dolly the trolley don't really match up, but we wanted to make it so that, again, that our community could see what we all see every day through a different lens and a different outlook. And yet we did not want it to be, we wanted people to still be proud of our community, but know that we have a problem. So we hired Dolly the trolley. We're blessed in New Rochelle with a ton of resources in terms of activists and historians. So we hired one of our NewRoAR members' son, who is an herbalist and had a background in urban development, and is a professor, and he was our docent for the tour. We put it out on the web, come join us, and we had over 100 people interested. So we had to do 2 tours, and you know, and then we did deep dives so that people could understand, like, what is the impact of you know, 15 cars being queued up underneath your window from 6 to 10 p.m. So we had doctors come and talk about the impact on lighting and noise and air pollution. We had a learning module on, you know, what does environmental justice look like? You know, we know what environmental racism looks like, but what does justice look like? And how, as a community, can we advocate for that? So we had, you know, and again, these are inexpensive ways in which to have a community. You reach out to your neighbors, you find your experts, you put it on YouTube, and you share it broadly. No cost, no cost. We contacted the Environmental Protection Agency. Actually, we contacted our congressman who put us in contact with the Environmental Protection Agency that has an office for environmental justice since the 1990s. Who knew? I did not know. They were so helpful. They, you know, you give them an address and they'll tell you what are the environmental hazards historically in that community. So this 1868 map of Pugsley Hollow basically shows you the rail yards where the churches were, where there was a black school. And then you fast forward, those same streets are where Con Ed had to do a cleanup because these 1800 gas bats were still there. So we did a lot of prep work while we were building interest in our trolley tour. And so that everyone could understand that we weren't making it up, that we weren't just, aesthetically, it's not pleasing to us to have, a drive-through with bright lights, underneath the windows of women and children, or, adjacent to a playground where our New Rochelle municipal housing, like if you could see this picture and this beautiful little girl, which is Jocelyn's little girl, those windows are for the emergency family shelter for the County of Westchester in New Rochelle. And it's right there. It's right there. And it kind of boggles the mind that anyone would think that's okay. I wouldn't want that. I dare say, the people who are on the planning board wouldn't want that. And yet somehow it's acceptable for people who have no voice. And the moral imperative to stop this is really what drove this. So one of our local artisans did this sign, "How many bucks equal one Black life?" And again, it's racism at its best, and it's always in plain sight. So again, I urge your viewership to go out and just see where people live. Jocelyn's going to show us.
There's a question I've had for a very long time, and it has to do.
This is a clip of our local news that we got for our trolley tour.
Rochelle is teaching people about environmental racism, a term that some people may never have heard before. News 12's Karen Hua is here to explain.
When you climb aboard this trolley tour of New Rochelle, you'll see the stores, the parks, the downtown, But what you might learn is much of this space used to be residential, inhabited by a rich African-American community.
New Rochelle's black community was considered the Harlem of Westchester. By the 40s and 50s and 60s, the Highway Acts and the urban renewal programs had completely destroyed the black community, and it's still in that condition today.
Now, commercial buildings and highways take up where the black community once thrived. In the black community, pushed out to poorer neighborhoods. And now those poorer neighborhoods, still the target of what's called environmental racism.
You'll often see bus depots, waste management plants, hazardous materials, oil and gas operations. These types of activities are often concentrated in communities of predominantly black and brown residents.
New Rochelle Against Racism, or NewRoAR, says the most dangerous part of environmental racism is many don't know about it. So to this day, local leaders often put up hazards and sources of pollution into neighborhoods of color subconsciously.
A prime example is a drive-thru Starbucks that will soon go up at Echo Avenue and Huguenot Street. Seems harmless enough, except it's next to a homeless shelter and a public housing complex. And this added traffic expected to create more pollution near these vulnerable families.
Our job is really to educate our planning department, educate our council and our mayor and our city manager to what we find to be acceptable in a community.
NewRoAR hopes with these educational tours, local leaders will consider environmental racism before approving more projects like the Starbucks. In New Rochelle, Karen Hua, News 12.
So that was our 15 minutes of fame for this issue. But the only thing the reporter got really wrong is it's not subconscious. It was a political and it was a decision that not only our city council made, but our planning board made. And the fight isn't done. We are committed to trying to save basically the lives of the people who live in that community. And we have not given up. So stay tuned.
Just, real fast, Lisa, thank you for showing that, and especially around the Starbucks. When we were speaking, this past week, when the five of us, and you guys spoke about that, just that, that blew my mind in that, I'm going to generalize, this and say that most people don't even think about stuff like that. Right. And so the question is, what can we do to make ourselves more aware, of stuff like this that's going on, not just only in that neighborhood, but, the neighborhoods around the country?
It's an unfair fight, right? It's an unfair fight. And we realize that with everything. There are people who get paid every day to go to the Department of Development or Department of Planning in your hometown to talk about their projects and what they need and what they want. And they know the folks there, the lawyers that they hire have connections to the city or the village or whatever. And they're all maybe not friends, but they know each other. They speak a common language. They have a specific goal. The public gets a notice maybe 30 days in advance and then has 3 minutes at a public meeting to say something. That is not a fair fight. That's not a fair fight. So what we recently had a learning module literally yesterday that Leslie was on with me, where we talked to urban planners and their advice to our community is have a vision. Engage in the process before anything is built. Make it understood to your city leaders what is acceptable and what is not. And to organize across different groups in order to be able to put forth a vision for your community that will protect the most vulnerable and will keep it from being a matter of course that this neighborhood will be the dumping ground, or this neighborhood, is ripe for the development as soon as we can remove the people from it. And that is the way in which communities should start organizing now. Because if you think you don't have it in your community and you have people of color in your community, I think you're mistaken.
I have one more question. I have a few more, but I just want to ask one more in terms of this. Where did it go? How does something like this, the effects of environmental racism, how does it affect the life trajectory of the people that live in these communities?
It's documented, right? It's documented that asthma, hypertension, all of these things that kill Black people disproportional is not because we are genetically, wired that way. It is because of the impact of the environment that we live in.
Yeah. You
cannot be free if you cannot survive your environment, right? So that's for the people themselves. But for the entire community, when you have children that spend more time in emergency rooms than in the classroom, you're going to have a problem with graduation rates. You're going to have a problem with employment. You're going to have a problem in your society because people who should be there to help uplift your community are struggling because they're being poisoned. When you have people who are literally dying in their 50s and their 60s, the wisdom of your community is gone. So it is not just a Black people's issue, and that is the problem of racism. Yeah, that it is not. It is the people who inflict the pain. It's the people who endure the pain, and it's the community that suffers for the lack of human capital that is being destroyed.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add in here that on our trolley tour, we went through a second neighborhood that has some history as a Black neighborhood. It's called City Park. And there's still housing that is for predominantly, I think, low and middle income Black families. But since they built that facility, they changed the zoning to be manufacturing only. And of course, not by coincidence, I-95, Interstate 95 is just a couple of blocks away from that area. And the zoning, has really, it's prohibited other residential housing from going up. It's kept it very industrial. And it's the site of, I think, a gas spill that has not been fully resolved yet. And in addition to those layers of zoning and planning, in 2020, a young man named Kamal Flowers was chased by police officers and also shot and killed there. And so we really see that as an example of where the built environment informs how people, including officers, public safety officers, police officers, treat and value the people who are located in those environments. So when Kamal was shot and killed there, it's not really an isolated event. It's compounded, right, by the zoning and built environment decisions that have been made for the last, like 75 to 100 years, really. And so I want to just, think about other, like Kamal Flowers. His name did not receive the media attention that George Floyd and Breonna Taylor did. There is video footage that is on YouTube that was captured and put together from industrial businesses' cameras. But that video is the only one, and it only has 3,000 views, whereas the views for Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, the list is like so long, it's a lot, but those views are in the hundreds of thousands. And because of where that killing took place, I think the officers, they have this preconception that they can behave with impunity, right? There are no people on the street, right? This is the site of a gas spill. This is a place where we know we don't really have to dot our I's and cross our T's, because that is what the environment is showing us, right? The environment is showing us how we can behave. Whereas if we were in this other part of New Rochelle called Waikegil, they would have to be really careful about how they behave, right? It wouldn't be a small thing if they chased and shot someone, even a Black person up in Waikegil, right? And they would never do that to a young white man, right? Kamal was 24, he was a father. And we understand that just like Waikegil has a Starbucks that is not a drive-thru, they would never put a drive-thru there. They would also never police people in Waikegil the way that they're policing people in these historically Black parts of New Rochelle. Go ahead.
Thank you for that. I just wonder if this is a good time for me to talk about the permits that have to be generated, right? Because Lisa was talking about that this was, and you have said, this is a very conscious zoning decision, made by our village board. And so one of the things that you said when we talked the other day, Lisa, was you talked about 1,000 cuts, right? The number of permits that have to be generated in order for these things to get put into place. What is that about, right? And what should we be looking for? Because they had to actually create special workarounds in order to do this stuff that's not good. I mean, can you say something about that?
Sure. So you know, and again, this is specific to New Rochelle, what we're talking about, but it is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, 2006, someone, you know, a bank wants to have a drive-through. Our county planning board says, bad idea. You're trying to do something with streets, walkability, and it's very close to residential. Bad idea. The city permits it anyway. One of the crucial parts of this community was a Stop and Shop that was blocks away. You know, you didn't have to drive, you could just go and reasonably priced groceries. They decide for whatever reason it's not working for them and they close up. And there's this 40,000 square feet of nothingness underneath our mall. And an Audi dealership wants to be there. Again, not permitted. It's not permitted, but they get a special permit. So despite the issues of air pollution, the issue of safety, you know, because if you have that many cars underground, it's going to be a challenge for our fire department, right? Somehow those all don't seem to matter in this space. In this space, it does not matter. And then you have the drive-through with Starbucks, and they actually have the nerve. They actually had the nerve to say, well, you've permitted drive-throughs here, there, and the other. How we're no different, and we should be able to do the same thing. So a decision in 2006 and a decision in 2017 leads to, of course, we're going to do this in 2021 because no one speaks up for those communities. And everyone thinks that it's just this, a restaurant that had been in that neighborhood for many years became an enterprise rental car place. And again, right underneath the windows, they're washing cars, they're idling cars, and it keeps going. So when you think that, the American system of economics started on the backs of stolen land and stolen people. So Black people are the capital in the capitalist system for the most part. And it just continues that our lives do not matter as much when there is a commercial interest at stake. And people of goodwill will absolutely deny that that is what's going on here. Because we're neighbors, our kids play in Little League together. We all cheer for the basketball team. We all come out for the football team. We're one big happy community, except when it comes to where people live and how they live. And then it, like I said, it becomes an issue of, well, they're poor, and if they wanted better, they should do better so they could live somewhere else, as opposed to, we've been living here for 50 years. You're ringing us around like a noose with environmental hazards, and we need help and we need you to stop. So same story.
Yeah, thank you. I tell you, it's heartbreaking, really. And Ms. Gaskin, I'm going to have a question for you in just a second, but please, you can answer this one as well, because you were talking, Ms. Burton, about being the capital in a capitalist system, and how capitalism started with colonialism and just stolen lands and stolen people. And really, it's clear in that conquest that global warming, like climate issues, in my mind and in the mind of many experts, are really directly related to white supremacy, right? This really just throwing people off their land, disregarding traditional uses of land, deforestation, uncontrolled consumerism, all those things that feed the insatiable need for power, right? My question is, for any of you, how do you feel that environmental equity can make an impact in the global climate change?
I can chime in here. We really need to be talking about reparations for legacy communities. In our town, in our city, when you begin to have relationships with the people that live in what was once Pugsley Hollow, when you begin to have relationships with the people that live along Lincoln Avenue, which is now called the Lincoln Corridor, when you begin to have relationships, or you develop or sustain or grow, curate, whatever the word is that you choose to use, when you have relationships with Black people that live in New Rochelle, what you find oftentimes in neighborhoods that are not affluent is that families have been here for generations and generations. And so the system, as it's currently set up, prohibits mobility in many cases from that affordable unit to property ownership. The system prohibits you from experiencing optimal health because of the fact that you're dealing with all of the pollution or all of the decisions that have been made by the city that are going to negatively affect you and your family. The families that live in these neighborhoods, that have grown up in these neighborhoods, have lived here for generations. And the city really must take different steps towards equity, because I don't see the equity. What I see is 18 developments going up throughout the landscape, and none of them are really about property ownership. They want to call it affordable, but it's not, because in the county of Westchester, one of the richest counties in the United States, a family of 4, according to the AMI, area median income, a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 children, is supposed to make about $110,000. But African Americans, people who identify as Black, maybe make half that much on average. So in the affordable housing that's being built, according to the regulations, according to what the city has planned, it is pushing Black folks out, basically. And as the community that grew this city, I mean, because there are people whose names were called out during Pugsley Hollow's document. There was work that one of our stakeholders did about the history of Pugsley Hollow, and in the names that were called out for the early families, there were names that were familiar to us all. You know, there is so much history here that has been, done because of the contributions of the Black people that live here. And yet every time another decision is made to improve the city, it really excludes the future or the benefit to my community. And it's a big problem. It's a big problem.
It's a huge problem. So I would like to talk about, I think, Ms. Gaskin, why don't you go ahead and share your screen, because you want to tell people how you are accessing the American Rescue Plan funds, and maybe help them understand how they can do that too.
Okay, so what part of the lessons of NewRoAR is to the way I interpret it is to infiltrate the system, to participate in it, to move from an area, even though I've said all of these things that are very sort of strongly serious, we have to move forward and organize, be together, show each other strength, and then participate in the system so that we can have transformative change. So what's on the table now is this. This is the ARPA money. These are the funds that every municipality is going to get as a result of living through COVID. New Rochelle was like the center of the pandemic for COVID back in, what was that, 2020, I guess. And so our community was hit the hardest in our area. And so whenever anything like that happens, it's Black and brown people that are hit the hardest. So Now they have decided, the federal government has decided that they're going to allocate funds to every city in our states. And New Rochelle is going to receive about 37 point something million dollars. The first part of that $18 million, which they call a tranche, our city has already received. This document, which our host is going to share with everybody, basically talks about that money. In order for that money to come to our communities, we are going to need to advocate for it. There are a bunch of regulations that have to be, and it's too many, slides to go through, but there are a bunch of regulations and limitations, restrictions. And so what we're going to have to do is reach out to people in our communities for programs and for advocacy and any of the community engagement modes that your city allows. So every month in the city of New Rochelle, there are city council meetings, planning board meetings, and in most cases, there is a time allowed for public hearing. In all of our cities, there is the ability to write an email, to make a phone call. People who are Black, people who are brown, and our allies have to begin engaging in relationships with people that we have already decided have a seat at the table, so to speak. In order to do that, we have to organize and we have to show up, because what the city does is they show you that you can engage the system, and then they feel that they have done their job by holding one public hearing, by having one community engagement town hall, and then they go ahead and plan to do whatever it is that they were planning to do anyway. And oftentimes I sit and I say to myself, well, what was the point if they've already decided how they're going to spend the money? And so now is the time when organizing in a community way, in a grassroots way, is important, so that you can shape the narrative and allow for something different to happen, so that the Black and brown community in your neighborhood, wherever that is, can benefit from this money. Because these funds that are coming in, if we don't engage, if we don't take hold of this opportunity, they will strategically make sure that it goes to other neighborhoods. They will make sure that it goes to whatever their next development is. And they will do it all, as Lisa said, skirting on, the legal aspect of it. They'll say it's fine to do, and they will word it in a way so that it appears that they're doing a good thing. On this same website, you can look at what other cities are doing. If you look at what maybe Buffalo is doing or Rochester is doing, they're making plans with programs that are actually going to benefit the communities by investing in small businesses. They're finding ways to help people get ownership of land, of homes. They're finding ways to replace the loss that was felt so deeply by Black folks in the cities that they're in. I don't know yet what we're planning to do. There's a recommendation, as recently as yesterday, our mayor sent out a document which recommends where he thinks the money should go. And for me, it was not a good look, because I don't see it coming to the community that was most affected. So Lane will share this with you. And in here are a lot of links that will point you in other directions for our city, for New York, for New Rochelle. But I'm sure that in California and wherever else you are tuning in from, you can look at it from your city's perspective as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think probably if you go to American Rescue Plan funds and put in your state, there will be something there. I will definitely put this in. And there's some great, people have some great questions and comments into the chat. Eugene, perhaps we should open the floor for Q&A while I put this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for those of you who are new to Race Talk Revolution, this is the section of the program where we, do a Q&A, and we ask you to raise your hand. So how you do that is you take your cursor to the bottom of the screen to the right, click on the reactions button, and in that you will find, you will see the bar that says raise hand. If you don't find it there, go to the left side of the screen, the lower screen, and see participants. Click on that, find your name, click on the little three dots to the side of your name, and you should be able to find the raise hand option there. A lot of good questions in the chat. Joe, I'm going to ask for you to ask yours instead of having me ask it. And then whoever else, please, there's a lot of good communication going on in the chat, and I would love for everybody who can to go ahead and join by raising your hand and asking your question real fast. You want to keep the questions and or comments to a minute or less. Okay, thanks a lot. Joe.
Thank you, Eugene. My question is a simple one. Does the NewRoAR organization make the trolley tour available to a congregation? So say, for example, I'm a member of a congregation in Westchester County. If we could fill the trolley bus, would ROAR consider doing a trolley bus tour for our congregation on one day of the week?
This was a impromptu effort on our part. So we are certainly happy to share our trolley tour, the trolley that we used and the name of our docet. We're hoping that other communities will use it as a template and do a deep dive in their communities to address this. So Lane has our contact information, and I'm happy to share how we put it together. And like I said, we did it thinking that the only way it wouldn't be successful is if no one came. And then we got such a great, just a great outreach. And so we're planning for future, but we're not quite there yet.
Also, the modules that Lisa was talking about, where discussions of like what environmental racism is, what environmental justice looks like, the history of Pugsley Hollow, and other aspects of it, they are available on YouTube. So anyone who got the email link for this call tonight, I believe one of your attachments is those links. So that is more of the information. And then we will definitely try to share with Lane and Eugene whenever we get to doing the second iteration. So this was the first annual. And when the second annual comes up, we would love to reach out and make it known. If you would like, you can absolutely message one of us your contact information so that we can update you specifically, since you are local.
You want them to put that in the chat? Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, who else has a question? While we're waiting, for people to come up with questions, which I know you have, I did a little research on this subject myself because I needed to educate myself, and it was just interesting that I found a statistic that said environmental racism is a leading cause of death in communities of color, which is really yeah, well, because all the health issues, the maternal death rate, right? The low birth term babies. I'm just butchering this, but do you know what I mean? I think it's just something that you just don't even think about. And
right.
And they're talking about also living amid industry can affect mental health very severely. right? About how the depression and the predictors of physical health and psychological well-being, a significant relationship there between, living in a place that's hazardous for your health, that all the time is hazardous for your health. Like it's always there. You never can't know it, right? If you live next to a drive-thru, it's impossible for you to not know you live next to a drive-thru, right? Wow.
Well, that's
Thanks.
the issue. That's the thing. That's the hook, or that's the problem with racism. It's everywhere and nowhere. NewRoAR, People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, teaches us that. It's hard to put a finger on it. The feet of oppression are now you see me, now you don't, because the system can only continue to work because there is an underclass. You know what I mean? It can only continue to thrive. It's not meant for Black people and brown people, people of color to thrive. The system is set up to keep us down, to keep us under, to keep us lacking. But we don't operate from that standpoint. We don't operate from a place of scarcity. Right. So we know that it can be changed, but it's a slippery kind of thing. Where is it? It's everywhere and nowhere. You know what I mean, Lane? It's hard to put a finger on it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Seja, and then Adelaide.
Hi, I'm primarily wondering about solutions and what kind of things you recommend, whether there's planning done in each area, in various areas that help to guide the placement of these more offensive facilities. I presume these are necessary facilities to somebody, whether it's a factory or whether it's a public utility. And how can we do better, I guess is my question. And how do you show both sides of the story so that we can move in a new direction?
Well, clearly there's an issue of repair, yes? When it was perfectly acceptable in the 50s, 30s, 20s, 1800s to disregard the lives of the people that were being dumped on, right? So that you have to have the mindset of repair. And then to do better, you have to, have empathy, I think. It just, in New York, there's the Cross Bronx Expressway. Major pollution. It tears through a neighborhood, black, white, or anything else. It just tore through. So now that the people who live there and are subjected to this massive amount of industrial pollution from the cars are Black and brown, because the white folks that could leave did leave. So what do? We're told we have to have this major highway. But we're also told that we're killing our planet because we have so much cars and pollution and such. So if you're going to be concerned about what's happening in the Amazon and turn a blind eye to what's happening to your neighbors as you go to your, summer place at the Jersey Shore, there's a problem. There's a problem. And so again, it's a question of looking at things with new eyes. Shut your eyes and then say, where am I and what's going on, and why would I want my grandchildren living here? And if I wouldn't want my grandchildren living here, why are people living here with children? And if children are living here, what is the impact? What is the state doing? How are we going to repair this? And why aren't more people upset about this? And then start finding the folks who get as upset as you are and organize.
Now, it sounds to me like a big piece of it is people finding united voices, making themselves heard. That's worked here in some cases and not in others.
It's a long game. It's a very long game.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's no quick fix. Another one of our principles. There is no quick fix.
Thank you very much. Adelaide.
Hi, I'm in the middle of a power outage here in Tuckahoe, but I'm on backup, so I'm talking quickly. we have an excellent county legislator who I saw on that trolley when you showed that film, as well as our new Congressman, Jamal Bowman. My question is, have they gotten some help for ROAR? Or has there been some interaction besides just a trolley ride?
Sadly, those were the only two elected officials that came on our tour. And they are both supportive of our efforts. Congressman Bowman's office is the one that put us in touch with the EPA folks that gave us the language that we were missing. And Legislative Moore has always been supportive of this community, and what he didn't know, he wanted to know. So, you know, I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you.
Well, there was a question about how you get your funding in the chat.
We passed the hat. We passed the hat.
Of what funding?
Yeah.
Lisa paid for the tour, to my knowledge, for all of the pieces of it to happen. And those of us who could just also made relatively small well, you know, no contribution is too small, but we made contributions. But I think that's an interesting question because it really identifies how we're uniquely poised in our community to affect change. We're not beholden to any outside interests. There are a number of leaders of community organizations in New Rochelle, and I'm sure you'll find this in other cities as well, who also have like appointments by their city council people, or different kind of conflicts of interest, right? Where they're going after money from the city, but at the same time, supposedly doing work to push back against what the city is doing. And really, we don't have that issue. Like that's something that we have not had to take on. And we try to continue our work in ways that we can be fully liberated in how we operate with our community.
And we did pass the hat among NewRoAR members. And, you know, that is the beauty of working in concert with like-minded people, is that, you know, I could front the money, but everyone had a piece of trying to make it whole and to contribute to the effort so that it was not a burden.
Yeah. Thank you. Cody, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I have lots of questions. First, I just want to say how wonderful it is that you're doing this. I admire you and I admire the optimism that is still contained in your message, because I find that really difficult. I asked a couple of things in the chat, and one of them had to do with the idea that the environment is a huge issue. It's not just pollution and trees and all that kind of thing. I think the environment that a lot of people of color live in is not an altogether friendly environment, particularly when they venture into areas where people don't look like them. And I think that does cause incredible stress, and is not good for your body. Now, one of my questions was, aren't there zoning laws that are residential, commercial, or doesn't it count if you're a person of color? or less moneyed?
Well, you know, in New Rochelle, we definitely have an overlay zone, and we definitely have, you know, commercial and residential. And in the instance of Starbucks, they did a special permit specifically zoned to say that what had never been allowed before, drive-thrus next to residential buildings, are now permitted, but only for multi-family housing, and not specific carve out for single family housing, which in New Rochelle is predominantly white people, and two-family houses, which again is predominantly white people. So again, in their minds, they did something that was logical, but it is racist. It's straight up, and it was by unanimous consent that zoning law went through.
Thanks, but Sorry.
Do you think that making our government entities more diverse, keep trying to elect Black and brown people to office will help any of this?
A good friend of mine's named Shane says there's kinfolk and there's skinfolk, and just one does not necessarily make the other. So what we need are people of conscience. What we need is an educated, elective group that sees the lens of racism, of undoing racism, that is laser beam focused on repair and do no more harm. So it doesn't, you can't tell people's heart by their skin color. And really it's yes, we need a diverse elected. Don't get me wrong on that, but there also needs to be a very clear understanding of what's going on and how to look at things. And I grew up in New Rochelle, and until sitting at that light at Echo and Huguenot and knowing that they were going to do this drive-through, it never dawned on me about the other areas of New Rochelle that are under assault. It's something you see all the time. It's just, I rode my bike through these neighborhoods and it just didn't make an impact until I started thinking, why would someone live here? And then it's like, well, they were here first. The other stuff was legislated and allowed and zoned in. And so it may take a minute, but that's what we need.
One of the things that I read was that it's cheaper for corporations to pollute communities of color than white communities because fines are lower. Is that something that you've also encountered?
It's if you look up on the American Bar Association, if you sue for injury as a Black person or a person of color, your suit will generate less money, period. Doesn't matter how high up or low on the system, your value in this station is not seen in the same fashion. So there's always an economic cost to things and a calculation. And that certainly is one of them. That, yeah, it'll cost you some bad PR maybe, but it's not going to cost you an exorbitant amount of fines.
Yeah.
So it's like what we call amongst ourselves, it's like the Black tax. Blacks get taxed in an extra way, in every which way here in America, as you were saying earlier about, what environmental racism does, what the rising climate is doing to Black communities. We start out impinged upon by the system, and there needs to be repair, reconciliation, reparations. It's a huge question. It makes everybody feel really uncomfortable, but we have to be willing to share culture and to ally, to organize, because we all know that it's wrong. It's what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, thank you.
Colleen.
Yes, hi. I know that Mayor Bramson had put out an RFP for a racial equity person. And I wonder if someone was hired and whether NewRoAR has any relationship with that person or with the city of New Rochelle government at all.
I haven't heard of anything. Jocelyn, Leslie?
No.
I think there was some type of implicit bias training recently. I'm not sure if it was citywide or just a particular department.
That I can speak to. There was, but it was too small. It was only for one day. It was supposed to be all of the city council commissioners, everybody there took it, but it was only for one day. And to my understanding, that is not a long enough period of time. It should be at least 3 days is the general rule. So hopefully that can continue. But we need checks and balances in terms of racism. You need your coattail tugged on a regular basis, and not just for people who have come to be called white, but for all of us. We all need to be what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? We all need to remember or be touched on occasion to reawaken our perceptions of racism and how it operates in the places that we live.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just to speak to relationships with the mayor and city council, we have been very, very vocal. They know that there's a problem with there being a drive-through where they're trying to put one. They unanimously voted in favor of that, including the mayor. And if you go back just a few city council meetings, it sounds like, Colleen, you might be familiar with NewRoAR local politics. So if you go back just a few meetings from when they decided in favor of the Starbucks, you'll see an hour-and-a-half discussion that they had about regulating leaf blowers in the North End, right? And like the more wealthy part of town, and how this was a very robust discussion, that they were genuinely concerned about what was happening with the crickets and the other, features of the environment. And their discussion around Starbucks and their reaction to our opposition to it, we believe is very telling. So where we're absolutely open to being an authentic relationship with them, we also are not going to let them sweep under the rug that they've all voted in favor of this, even though the Municipal Housing Authority, the commission that kind of helps to guide municipal housing, they submitted a letter being against the drive-through also, and that was not discussed at all in their meeting. So I think this question of relationships, we're really trying to push what we can do on a grassroots level, because it's very clear that the elected officials, when they have the choice, they are siding with the developers in this instance, and going against their any type of conscience or sense of morality. Their sense of morality is totally void.
Which goes to my point.
Can I just
about
ask a quick follow-up? What's the status of the drive-through? Has Starbucks backed off or what?
We haven't seen any work being done on the site, and we're not really privy to the developers. I think they're still waiting for something from the state transportation because they want to do a two-way cut through, which again will impact traffic. So they always talk about traffic studies. Traffic studies have done the worst things in this community that one can imagine. So a traffic study does not mean much, but that's what I believe they're waiting on.
David, I want to hear from you, but I want to ask, because Terry put in the chat, I thought there was no idling law in New York State. And that's something that you talked about, Lisa, and just said that they overrode that or something?
Apparently, and this can only be, bureaucracy at its best. If you are in a drive-through and you're slowly rolling down the road, that is not considered idling. That even though Starbucks says on average that to get through their drive-through from the time you place your order to you pick it up is about 5 minutes. Ooh. They don't consider that idling because you're actually rolling along. You're not standing still. So we have a drive-through in New Rochelle in the North End. It's a part of a shopping center, not near any residential. The line that goes out into the road is outrageous on a Saturday afternoon. someone's already been hit because people get, upset with the line and cut and a bicyclist. So we have real life examples how it does not really work and it's a bad model, but still undeterred.
David, I saw your hand up and now it's not there. Do you have a question or a comment?
No, thank you. I'm good. I was listening to Colleen and the questions that she was asking. And so in part, I'm just so grateful that Leslie and Lisa and Jocelyn have been responding to all of these questions. So no, not really. I mean, other than the only thing I will say is that the question I was going to respond to, or at least try to respond to, is the question around whether or not we have a relationship with the city of New Rochelle in regards to issues associated with anti-racist training or any issues such as that might be. And what was mentioned was that there's no quick fix to this, but we've been very transparent with the city of New Rochelle around issues associated with racism and institutional racism and structural racism, and have entered into conversations with them time and time again. What we have learned is what I really want to just state here, particularly since there was mention about funding and things along those lines. What we've learned is that in relationship to issues around race and racism, that the public space belongs to us, whatever that public space might be, whether those public spaces are public parking lots, public parks, whatever they are, they belong to us being the community. And so in relationship to the city and our responding to the city and our engaged in conversations, part of our way of moving forward, and will continue to be our way of moving forward, which we all are in agreement around, is by building out our base, by making people aware of what's going on, by continually taking up the public space at city meetings, continually taking up the public space at planning meetings, continually taking up the public space in relationship to creating that dichotomy around what is it that you're doing and what is it that you should be doing and why. And so for organizing purposes, that is the key. You will never make any change in any particular way working with the governmental entities such as they are, who respond more often than not in a transactional way. They only want you to be quiet. They will respond in some way that they believe will quiet you down. But when you're interested in transformational change, the investment within transformation is what people are not necessarily commonly aware of. And so the efforts that have been discussed here today speak to a transformational change. They are not talking solely and only about a particular issue occurring at the Starbucks lot. We're talking about the way in which structural and institutional racism works collectively together to oppress Black people in the city of New Rochelle, both historically and now, to oppress brown people who are moving into the city in a different way, historically and now. And so our interest is not in an exchange of any kind of oppressor, but in relationship to making sure that structural and institutional racism is the issue and not cultural diversity, such as it's been defined as a way in which our city gets along. The disproportionality and disparity in every area within our city, and similarly in others, is essentially always the same. You must have a permanent class of those who do not matter in order to create classes of others who do. And that conversation publicly needs to continually be part of the public space, and not only in conversations that react and respond in a transactional way. So I'm really pleased that and hopeful that this conversation nationally takes on that framework. So continue to support us in New Rochelle. Just because you don't live in New Rochelle, don't mean you can't be part of the public space that's upsetting you about the issue that was raised today. So that was what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, David. David is also a member of the New Rochelle Against Racism. Tina.
Yes, thank you. In terms of organizing, do you have, I mean, this is kind of piggybacking on what Dave was saying, do you have allies, people who are I don't know, better position, for lack of a better word, to get the attention of the people who make these, you know, these decisions?
You know, there's no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. So, you know, we're consistent with our viewpoint and our lens, and we have people in our community that will join in on certain aspects and not on others. And we don't take it personally. You know, if what we would hope to be allies are not as strong in opposition to what we're doing, that's okay too. You know, it's, you know, we control us. We can't control everyone else, but we do try and build community, and we do try and broaden our base, because that's the work of organizers, is to broaden the base.
Thank you.
I have a taxi to take me to Chase
I
Manhattan.
have I'm looking for her hand up, Lane, but I don't see it.
No, Adine, you put something in the chat, but we're going to give you the last question. Would you like to unmute?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. I was wondering if extensive planned pickets and demonstrations, really big ones, that would extend for months and months, might make Starbucks reconsider, because it would embarrass them nationally.
Yeah. Well, we had a letter writing. I think, Jocelyn, you had the cards. On our trolley tour, we gave everyone homework. we had some postcards to Starbucks headquarters, telling them this was a bad idea and asking them not to come to this particular location as a drive-through. No one's saying anything bad about Starbucks. It's just that, you know, drive-through does not make sense. So we passed out these postcards to the CEO and president of Starbucks, and you know, if anyone is interested in that, continuing on with helping us with that postcard campaign, we can certainly share this.
Postcards are very polite, though.
This is true. This is true.
Pickets are not so polite.
Pickets, yeah. Yeah. It's funny, when we were doing the trolley tour, my overarching goal was not to require a permit of the city, not to have to ask the police, the commissioner, no permits, you know, so we didn't have hop on, hop off, which is normally what trolleys do during Art Fest. And I kind of feel the same way about demonstrations. I don't like to ask them for anything, but that's just me. I mean, maybe Jocelyn and David and Leslie have different ideas, but my thing is to act in a fashion that does not require permission.
May I come in here a little bit, just in this moment?
Yeah, we have just a couple more minutes, okay, David, and we have to close
Okay,
up.
no, I just want to make an appeal to those of you who are in Seattle. It's my understanding that you also have a listening group from Seattle, Washington, and I'm really clear that in Seattle there's a lot of organizing, and in relationship to that, Starbucks and their headquarters is in Seattle. So the sense of supporting and making known the way in which Starbucks is engaging in their actions here in the city of New Rochelle, and at the same time acting as if they are a progressive anti-racist organization. There's a disconnect between what we're raising here and what they in fact are doing in the city of New Rochelle. So if you are in Seattle, I encourage you to rattle the cage, if you will, in the city of Seattle. You know, politeness is one thing, organizing is another. It's organize, organize, organize. And that's all I wanted to say, Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. And that really, you know, has me dovetail on that and with this last question. And this goes to all of you from NewRoAR. What would you say is the most important thing for folks to take away from this conversation today?
Learn more about what's in your community and start organizing yourself, your neighbors, and the people of color who are being oppressed by rules and regulations that on the face seem to be non-racial, but are very much impacting people of color.
Thank you, Lisa. Rochelle or Leslie?
I'll say if you don't look for it, you won't find it. So you have to always be looking for racism, because otherwise it will hide, as Leslie said earlier.
It's everywhere and it's nowhere.
I would say to find some people, like-minded people to be in relationship with. And if you can attach yourself to a group that is, you got the fundamentals that NewRoAR has, then that would be a great jumping off point, because it will change your life to learn not only the history, but to experience that workshop. For me anyway, as a Black person, it really changed my life. I don't look at racism the way that I used to previous to my becoming a member of NewRoAR.
Thank you. Thank you all of our guests for being here today. Lane?
And let me just say too, that you said you wanted your program or your trolley program to perhaps be a blueprint for other people to follow. Can people get to you through the Facebook page? What's the best way for people to get through to you? And would you mind putting that into the chat?
Yes, there's a NewRoAR Gmail account. David, is that okay for us to use?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, then
Okay.
I will find that and put that in.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much to our speakers. We are going to take the week off next week, so we can celebrate Thanksgiving with our families, and you can too. We're going to be back the following week with a conversation with a filmmaker and racial justice activist, Frances Cozy, who will be discussing her film, The Long Shadow, which explores her own family's history of slaveholding and how the institution of slavery continues to have an impact today on her own personal journey. We have our own private link to that movie, and we would like you to prepare for that conversation by actually watching the film between now and then. So if you need something to watch on Thanksgiving or with family, please do watch that. It's a great look. I'll put it in the chat and also send you an email about it. You can also share that link on social media pages and invite people to join you for the talk back on December 1st, okay? That link becomes active this Friday, and I'm going to put that here. Also, if you're local here in Westchester, we look forward to seeing you this Friday at the 10th annual Community Visual for Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., once again, who was murdered by police 10 years ago during an illegal entry. That is Friday. I'm going to put that information in the chat. And as usual, we encourage you to please continue to be in conversations with people who don't look like you. And as our guest speakers encourage you today, continue to look for opportunities to make good trouble. All right, everybody. Turning this over to Eugene.
And just a reminder, don't forget that we will be hosting a one-day virtual workshop on Saturday, and these are the correct dates and times. My apologies for that information going out incorrectly. That workshop will be Saturday, December 11th. It is called What's Ours to Do? And it goes from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, this workshop is designed to provide you with tools that can help you have these difficult conversations regarding race in your families and communities, and then also to deepen your connection to humanity and clarify your personal call to action so you can do the work you feel called to do. You can register for this workshop at our website at www.racetalkrevolution.com/events. Now, because this is a first-time offer, we are offering it at a reduced price of $50, and we are limiting it to a participation of 22 people. So we hope you take advantage of this opportunity. Once again, I want to thank our speakers, Leslie Gaskin, Lisa Burton, Jocelyn Ffriend, and David. Thank you so much. We love to have all of you back to continue this conversation because, as we like to say on Race Talk Revolution, every voice matters.
Take care,
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good holiday, everybody. Be safe.
You too.
See you December 1st.